This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Hi, I'm kchoi. Welcome back to my channel. A lot of you are really interested in working at a big four firm or an MBB consulting firm. So I've done a couple of interviews with people who have worked or currently work at some of those companies. The previous video I uploaded was with a CPA consultant at a big four firm, and then the one before that was with a former consultant at an MBB firm. Today's guest is Steph from Steph Den, and she's a strategy and operations associate supporting a talent acquisition team at a big four firm. So I thought Steph would have a really unique perspective to share because she's not a consultant at a big four firm, but she just has that visibility into what life is like at a big four firm. Also, because she supports a talent acquisition team, she has a lot of good knowledge about resumes and interviews, and we get into all of that in this video. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. You know that I've talked about Squarespace before, but in case you're unfamiliar, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to build a website, whether it's a personal blog or an online store or a portfolio. Kind of can do anything. I've been using Squarespace to create my own blog, which I haven't officially launched yet because I want to develop a few more blog posts before I make it live. But let me know in the comments if you just want me to go ahead and launch it. I have 2 blog posts right now, so if you're interested in seeing those, let me know and maybe I'll go ahead and launch it a little earlier. I love writing, so I've really been enjoying the process of getting back into blogging, but also Squarespace just makes it really easy to create blog posts, to schedule them, categorize them, and also just make everything look really, really sleek and beautiful. I also love the idea that if I want to start a podcast in the future or do anything else, I can find a way to integrate it into my website and just have everything live in one place. And Squarespace just makes it super, super simple to do that. So if you're also looking to create a website, then go to squarespace.com/kchoi and get a free trial. And then when you're ready, you can use the code kchoi to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. All that information will be in the description box below, so be sure to check that out after you watch this video. And thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring. With that, I think we're ready to dive into the interview. I'll have timestamps below so you can find the questions and jump around if you want, and enjoy this conversation that I had with Steph. Hi, Steph.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, doing well.
I'm a big fan of yours and Den's videos and all the really helpful information you share, so super excited to talk to you today. Why don't we just dive in and you can tell us about your role and just how you got there.
So I did a Bachelor of Commerce degree because I always knew I wanted to do business, but I didn't know exactly what. I assumed I didn't really want to work in finance and accounting. I did do one internship in finance and it just wasn't for me. So I ended up specializing in human resources in my 3rd or 4th year. And then right after that, before my 4th year, I got my first internship, co-op role. I wasn't actually in a co-op program, but just a summer internship in an HR team. So it was an HR student role, but I specifically ended up working in the talent management team. So that was performance, but also talent acquisition. So the recruiters and also their performance leader, which was really awesome. I did that for 8 months, 4 months full-time, 4 months part-time, really got exposure into that piece. And I really liked it, but I also knew that I didn't want to stick with recruiting full-time. But when I started to look for full-time roles, obviously since my past experience was as a talent acquisition coordinator in that team, it made more sense and was easier for me to actually apply for and get a role that way. And I also wanted to move cities at the time, so I didn't have a lot of connections. So I got my first job as a recruiter right out of school. Actually, I applied on Indeed, so that can happen. You can apply on Indeed and get the role. I did that for about 7 or 8 months, and then I knew that I wanted to work for a larger company and I wanted to step out of being in a recruiter space. I didn't want to have to keep going down that path because I feel like if you get too far into it, it's harder to switch. So I applied to a few different big four firms and other bigger companies. The reason I wanted to work there is because there's so many different HR roles that you can get into. So I actually work with a talent acquisition team and with recruiters, but I don't recruit myself. I'm more on the strategy and operations side. So I have an operational role, but within recruiting and within a human capital team.
So what does that look like in terms of the strategy and operations side in support of the recruiting and HR team?
Even you just saying it, I feel like it's a role that kind of needs to be explained. Like so many roles, especially at big companies, they have all those funny titles and it's harder to know exactly what someone does from what it sounds like. So one of the reasons I really like being on the strategy and operations side is because you have so many transferable skills. Like you could do a strategy and operational role for any team in any company, and you're gaining a lot of technology skills and reporting. So for me, basically, I explain it as the context and all of the data we work with is recruiting data, but we're helping make sure that the recruiters can do their role seamlessly. We do a lot of process improvement and process enhancement. That also sounds really generic, but it's basically a lot of reporting 2, we report on different application statistics, recruitment statistics for the recruiters and the recruitment function. And then on the flip side, we do a lot of documentation and training on new systems and processes. Anytime we have new software or systems brought in, that could be part of the recruiting software and systems that candidates would actually see. It could be internal resources. My team will test those, help onboard them, work with the vendors, create all the process documentations and maps that we need, and do all of that internal behind the scenes stuff. So basically everything that the candidates would see, we're on the back end making sure that it's in place and running efficiently and effectively. What's cool about it too is it's something that I wouldn't have known existed, right? You don't know that even in school. And when you're in HR, I've talked about this recently, I feel like you think you have to work in compensation or benefits or be a recruiter, but there's all those little behind the scenes roles that are part of it too. And if you're in a bigger company, you have the ability to find those roles that you'd never hear about and actually work on them. So I like that I'm learning a lot of reporting and technology and digital skills that aren't really related to HR. They're just general skills that I can, take forward.
So then what would you recommend for people who might be interested in strategy and operations, like in terms of what they should study, like what types of internships they should look for? Any advice there?
That's a good question, because for me, I kind of fell into that. When I even applied for my role, I thought it was more of a recruitment role than it even is, which was nice, and I liked it even more. And it's what I was looking for without even knowing it. Studying wise, and we did talk about this recently in a recent video, that you don't take strategy as your specialization in school. You don't take consulting either. So your background can kind of be anything, particularly if you're in business. Obviously that's a good background for having a strategy and operations role, but you could do engineering or something too, right? And work in an operational perspective. I think what to look for, what really helps is if you reach out to people at companies you want to work for, they can help you know what the structure is internally. Like you'll never know, right? Online, it's not really advertised or shared. But if you talk to people, they'll know someone who works in a really cool team, and they'll know someone that works in this team, and then you can learn how that breaks down. Also, if you just get into a company, like if I started as a recruiter, I could have switched into a strategy and operations role too, or worked your way up to it at a more senior level. So whatever your background is in, schooling wise and educationally, once you get into a company that has those opportunities, hopefully you can also switch into that too.
What do you think is like the most common way that you see people getting hired? Like, is it through, you mentioned you got a job through Indeed, so is it through like online applications? Is it through personal connections? Like, what do you see as the most common way?
I think, and maybe speaking about bigger companies, big four firms, bigger consulting firms in general, obviously online applications, that's going to be the biggest piece. There's so many people who want those roles, consulting for specifically too, right? It's such a high volume of applications. So online applications is how probably statistically the majority of people do end up in the role, but you have to really stretch beyond that, right? If you do know someone who can give you a referral, obviously that's going to help you because it increases your chances of getting an interview by a lot. They're basically taking the advice of whoever already works for them and trusting that you're worth the interview. So if you're really good at interviews and can sell yourself, then you already have a huge head start if you can do that. If you can't, I think it's a conjunction of applying online, but doing everything else you can to stand out. So reaching out on LinkedIn and having coffee chat, making sure that your application is as strong as it can be, going to networking events. Again, a lot of big four firms, there's so many different networking events that you can be a part of, whether you're a student or you're not. So overall, I'd say that most people do get hired from online applications, but you have to really push and do more than that to get the final job and land it.
I know you have a video about like resume tips and stuff, and I think you shared in it that recruiters only look at a resume for like 7 seconds or something like that per resume. So any tips for how you can make your resume stand out in that whole process?
Yeah, this is one of the topics I'm passionate about because it's true, like no matter where you're applying, at some point your resume is a part of it. That's the first step, or it's pretty quick to the beginning of the process. And there's just so many resumes out there, and everyone has that question, right, of what you can do to stand out. So we do break it down, and I actually walk through what I do when I'm building out a resume in that video. So check it out if you want tips. If a recruiter is only looking at your resume for an average of 7-ish seconds, think about it, they have a huge stack, whether that's physically or online on the computer. They're just skimming for keywords or things that catch their eye. And then if you catch their eye, they'll read your resume. But you need something to catch their eye to begin with. So one is making sure that your resume is laid out in a way that's easy for them to read the key information. So whether that's visually appealing, having white space in different areas to break up your sections. A lot of people jam-pack their resumes so that they have everything in there, but if they're not even reading it, it doesn't help you to have everything in there. So making sure it's easy to see what the main information is, and also having your most relevant information to the role at the top of your resume. For some people, that might be their education. Maybe your educational background is exactly what they're looking for the role, so you put that first. or maybe it's not, and your actual work experience is better. So then you put your education at the bottom so that they're seeing it later on and they see what's most relevant first. So those are two of the big ones that I think can really catch their eye and then get them reading the rest of your content.
So obviously, I know a lot of people out there are really interested just in working at Big Four firms. What's that interview process like, just from start to end?
First, I'd recommend really, people probably always hear this, but look at their website and really take a look at what they say their application process is. It's on there. One of the main things, since there's so many people applying, is you can't miss deadlines. You can't make little mistakes. You have to stick to it and make sure you're hitting it all properly. So really know exactly what that specific firm's application process looks like. Overall, it's going to be online applications. And this is similar whether you're a student in a campus hire or later on. The difference is that campus, they have certain times of years that they're actually hiring, right? So make sure you know the deadlines. Make sure you're applying early too. For consulting, for example, it's normally a year in advance that you should really be starting to apply. Let's say you're graduating in September or even June. The September before that, you should be applying and probably landing your job ideally. After that, it's a phone or video interview. It depends on the company. And then the in-person one. And then if it's consulting, obviously there's case interviews too, and that's going to be the same whether it's a campus or later on. Otherwise, there's normally just, it ends with in-person interview. Sometimes there's more than one. In my case, when I got hired on the internal side, just for some background, I did an online application. I had a phone interview. I had an in-person interview, and then I had one more little follow-up phone chat actually. So little things like that can happen too. And then that's it. Hopefully you're hired after that.
You talked about things people can do to stand out with their resume, but what can people do to stand out during that interview process?
The main thing that I would tell everyone is you really need to tailor every step of your application process to that role and to that company. And that feels like a lot of work, especially when you're just graduating or in any time you're job searching and you need a job, like at a certain time, you're just applying everywhere that you can. But taking the time to really tailor, first of all, your resume, making sure that your qualifications and what you include on it is tailored to the job. Also, the language that the company uses, I think, is huge. Like different firms will use different synonyms of words, right? So make sure you're matching their vibe and language of the role. And when you get to the interview process, making sure you can answer the key questions. So those are going to be why this specific firm, right? That's a big one. And sometimes you don't actually care what firm you're working at, right? You want to work in consulting, for example. But you have to have an answer to that and make sure it actually lines up and makes sense for that firm. Another big question that you can do to really stand out is making sure that you can answer what you want to do in the future. That's one of those questions that you kind of think might not matter in an interview process, like, oh, it's up to you, it's personal. But make sure what you say you want to be doing down the line actually lines up with the role you're applying for, right? So that they can see, oh yeah, they could do that eventually in this role. Another big one that I say all the time too is people want to reach out on LinkedIn to recruiters all the time. I can't even tell you how many messages I get when people think I'm a recruiter or they message other recruiters that I work with. And they just get so many messages that it gets lost, right? What I think is really helpful and will help you stand out is reaching out to people who work in the role that you want, who are already in that role, and getting the insight on what that team is like, what their actual day-to-day looks like, that behind-the-scenes insight. So when you are in an interview, you sound like you know what you're talking about because you do. You actually already sound like a natural fit because you know what you would be doing. So that really stands out too in the interview.
Do you have any other final advice for people who are looking to apply to a Big Four firm, whether it's in a consultant role or if it's some other like internal role like yourself?
I think one thing that I didn't mention, but again is also obvious, is networking. That one's huge. That's something that you really do need to do, and it's not lost for anyone when you are applying to a Big Four firm or any big company. I had to do a lot of reaching out. I reached out to all the different recruiters that I worked with because it was different for me. You shouldn't always reach out to recruiters, like I said, but I was going to be working with the recruiters I was reaching out to. Final advice is just making sure that you're hitting all the deadlines, you're being early for everything, you're following up, and you're shooting your shot. You're keeping at it. You keep going. If you don't get hired at one firm, maybe you ask for feedback and see what you can do different in the future. And just keep applying and reaching out and doing informational interviews and coffee chats, again, with people who work in the role that you want, so that even if you don't end up getting a job at that organization, you know so much more for the job that you eventually do land.
That is all such really good advice. Thank you so much, Steph, for just sharing a bit about your career journey, how you kind of went from working in recruiting to now doing some strategy and operations, and then just sharing some of your insights about, applying to Big Four firms in general. I'm really, really glad that you were able to come on and just take the time to share all of that.
Totally, thank you. And one thing I did want to say that I didn't mention when we were talking about resumes is then I do free resume reviews on our website, stephden.com. I know that you can pay a lot of different places to get your resume reviewed, but we want to do a free service for people that watch our videos or just want that second set of eyes, maybe editing or giving them tips on how to enhance their resume. So if you go to our website, you can sign up and submit your resume, and we can do that for free for you too.
I love that, and that will be linked in the description box, as will be Steph Den's YouTube channel, where they share a lot more information on some of the stuff we talked about in this interview, as well as beyond that. So be sure to go check them out and subscribe. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.